Hello. Welcome to the hard reset. What just happened?
So I've got no wait, finish telling me about the aliens, because that was
No, it's the
actually
craziest thing. I do this weird stuff where like I can't fall asleep, and so like for whatever reason, it's something wakes up in my head, and it's like you gotta, why is why has civilization only become advanced with this, say, within like the last 100 years? Industrial
Right.
revolution, whatever. I mean, you could say arguably we were doing great math and whatever, going clear back to like freaking Greeks or whatever.
Yeah.
But we've only become technologically advanced within like the last 100 years, realistically since the 40s, probably. Some of it's in like the 30s, the Einstein stuff, and some of the theories that they came up with. But what's super weird is if you look at it, and I don't know why this stuff's stuck in my mind after all these years, but they say like basically, the first, I guess not even mammals. So the first, single celled organisms or something was like 3.5 billion years ago.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And then basically the first primates only showed up probably about 55 million years ago. So that's a huge time span. So about 55 billion years ago, which the dinosaurs were like 65 million years ago or whatever. But
Are we allowed to talk about dinosaurs?
I don't know.
Is that going to make some people upset?
Maybe. I don't know.
Kind of curious
Science.
about that.
There's giant bones and like there's giant bones and you can go touch and feel. And there's a whole field of archaeology that, deals with just
I think that sounds
dinosaur bones.
Yeah, I think that can be verified. Yes.
So anyways, there's roughly 55 million years ago, 50 to 55 million years ago, the first primates. So basically our ancestors of our ancestors, whatever.
Yeah.
And then they think basically the first iteration of us, Homo sapien or whatever, was about 300,000 years ago. So somewhere between 55 million years ago, and it took them all the way until 3 million or 300,000 years ago, not even a million years ago, 300,000 years ago, the first iteration of us to come up.
Right.
Right.
So, not to cut you off, sorry about that, but you woke up thinking all this?
Yeah.
That
It's stuff like this rattles around in my head because like I've learned this stuff, or like I went down that rabbit hole at some point before, because I'm just like one of those weird guys. It's like shouldn't be allowed to have Google, because I just Google all that stuff because I'm thinking about it,
Right. Yeah.
And so at some point I looked all this stuff up. So I know I'm really close on the whole, it's actually like 3.22 billion years ago is when they think like the first, single cell organism, something like that. Primordial ooze, popped out of the primordial ooze.
Yeah.
And then I know for a fact that that's the current estimate, because that always changes. But they think the first primates was about 300,000 years ago. Right. And the first the first primates were 55 billion years ago. The first version of us, Homo sapien, was about 300,000 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a huge time span before they got to us. And there were several, what they call like the missing link, and which that's not really missing. They've found several different offshoots of Homo sapien.
So they found the
caveman and all this kind of, they found the missing link per se, but I know there's several branches that they've found that's similar to us.
Right.
There's like there's an ape and like the Desovians or something that was basically in Russia, which is, a form of primate that was pretty close to us, but it was not us. But so the first iteration of us was about 300,000 years ago. But they're thinking that basically our current form, brain size, all that good stuff has only been around about 100,000 years. Right.
Mm-hmm.
But they know that there's been extinction level events. There's this thing called a genetic bottleneck, which they think probably about 75,000 years ago. There was like this Toba event, which was like a super volcano. It would be basically like, unleashing all the nuclear weapons on the planet at one time, caused like a nuclear winter. Well, supposedly it killed off our ancestors down to, through genetics, they can find that there was only about 1,000 of us left.
Okay.
They don't know what time period, how long, specifically that it took. They just know that it happened about 75,000 years ago. So our current form was only about 25,000 years old, and it completely reset us down to like 1,000, basically 1,000 people. Had to repopulate the planet, right? So another 75,000 years, to this date is like where we're at. But since we started, they can go on 23andMe, and they'll have like these things talking about your papillo group and your maternal, basically your mom and your dad's sides.
Right.
And it literally everybody's goes back to essentially those 1,000.
So
3, 2, 1.
I wonder how
Disco.
accurate is that 23andMe?
All right, so let me sum up how I got, again, laying in bed, and my brain went to this weird space where, because I'm like trying to fall asleep.
Yeah.
And I probably have like 5 hours or something until I have to get up. And I go to this weird space where I'm thinking about how the human civilization got as advanced as it did only within like the last, say, realistically, probably maybe 60 years, like that. We're honestly, from the time let's say to give people credit, say within the last 100 years.
Man, see, yeah, I think I'd probably go back as far as that. 'Cause I think you really want to, and as much as I hate to say it, is like television, and not necessarily television, but the transmission cross continent of communications.
So you're talking about like the
communications wise, I guess I should say.
Morse code.
It could be Morse. It could be television. It could be broadcast of any sort, which I think is.
See, my thoughts for an advanced civilization, if you will. I'm thinking about like advanced, mathematics and certain things.
Oh, okay.
But that's not really a way to judge it either, because we had mathematics dating back to the Sumerians. Like the first forms of advanced mathematics actually came from like the Persians or something. So we had it, but I'm just wanting to know how in my mind, I'm trying to figure out how we translated those mathematics into being as advanced, and the rapid advancement. So it's one thing to sit around and come up with all these theories like Einstein and all these people did.
Okay.
And then apply them to space travel. Like how to, get a trajectory to the moon.
Yeah, I'm still amazed.
And then apply electronics.
I'm still amazed
to it.
by that, which it may be simple, but
and then apply it to electronics that will pretty much kind of do it for you, because, prime example, like, with the benefits of technology is the ability to be able to calculate faster than we can calculate something. And it, like, translating in this case to like, say like a trajectory of like hitting the moon versus completely missing the moon.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Across hundreds of thousands or, 100,000 miles or whatever it is to the moon.
Right. Yeah.
And being within, like GPS being within like 3 feet of where we need to go on said space in the moon. Somehow we've come up with all this technology, and we've solved all the problems in between of things like re-entering the Earth's atmosphere with technology that somehow will not burn up.
Yeah, right.
Under thousands and thousands.
How do you figure that one out? Because
you
haven't done it yet, but
somehow we transverse a radiation belt to get to the moon, right? I'm like somehow convincing myself that we did not go to the moon. I sound like a conspiracy theorist, which means the next part's going to get like super weird.
Oh dear.
It's going to get super weird, because then I'm going to talk to you how I got the aliens from me sitting around thinking about how we became so advanced so quickly, right? This has been a problem for human civilization as long as we've had like a modern civilization where people went outside and sit somewhere and looked at the stars, right?
Right.
All these ancient cultures literally tracked, like the Mayans and like a lot of South Americans and even the Egyptians, like tracked the stars was their big thing.
So,
they built stone monuments that literally would show like most of the time they'll say it has something to do with the planting season, the growing stuff.
Yeah.
Like once we transversed past being a hunter gatherer and started, basically being a farmer, making our own crops, they were tracking like the winter and summer solstice.
Yeah.
Which literally became a religion in itself. Halloween and whatever, springtime, whatever. But they would literally make these huge stone monuments that would align and shine a light or whatever through a hole on the winter solstice.
Mhm.
So they knew they would needed to harvest or whatever. And they would have another monument that would go through. And once the sun would get in a certain part of the sky and whatever, some kind of monument, that meant it was spring and that you needed to plant your whatever,
See, I think that part, I think it's awesome. It's amazing. But at the same time, it's not flooring because it's one of those things like, so if you want to consistently repeat something over and over, such as crops, then you find a tool that's able to do that. Now, whether it's a notation in the sky, or a set point on the earth, which to me, that makes complete sense.
Well, that's kind of what the whole winter and summer solstice thing does, is it's kind of a guideline. Like people, if you know people that are like farmers, like winter solstice, you're not always going to pull your crops out on X date.
Right.
Depends on how much rain you have that year, how much like whatever, sun, all this kind of stuff. It's basically like the shortest perimeters. So it's, in other words, this is roughly when you need to put your crops in order for your crops to be able to come out at this time.
Right.
But depending on rain, like whatever, they're just saying when that light shines through that hole, that should be about the time that you should start looking at your crops.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
To take them out.
Mm-hmm.
Or when the light shines through a certain hole for the summer solstice or, whatever, then you're generally probably going to have no more cold freezes so that when you plant your stuff, it's not going to freeze something to death. Right? Generally. So they find the two most narrow points and they know that that's basically going to be like your growing season.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I'm getting like way in depth, but that's basically that. It was a survivability thing. That was a tool that made their life easier if they had some kind of parameter of when the growing season was.
So how do the aliens play into this?
Okay. This is where I'm going with this. Again, we talked about essentially the earliest version of us was about 300,000 years ago. Right.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And then our current form, they think it happened about 1,000 or 100,000 years ago. And then they had this thing, this basically a younger Dryas event, or I'm sorry, can't remember there was a super volcano that occurred roughly 75,000 years ago that they think that basically bottlenecked us down, or what they call a genetic bottleneck. It brought us down to about 1,000 people on the whole planet because they survived essentially like a nuclear winter. Right.
Right.
And of those 1,000, supposedly that's where we came from. Right. Well, the earliest known documentation, in other words, like stories and whatnot, are essentially the Sumerians, which are like the precursors of the Egyptians, right? They had these Sumerian texts, and they talked about like their origin story, if you will, if you want to put it in like a superhero terms. They talk about their origin story of how they became like whatever. How they became whatever. Their ancient Sumerian texts actually talk about Nibiru, which was a planet. Essentially, called it like it's now sometimes called Planet X, but basically it was like a 10th planet. It's now going to be like
say Nibiru out loud. Is that anyways?
So we've now declassified like one of our planets is no longer a planet or something. So now we have 9 planets, but it'd be like a mysterious.
Yeah,
planet.
was it Pluto that got?
Yeah, I think it was like Pluto or something.
They called it a big ice ball or something.
But back then, basically, we termed it Planet X, right? Which means it's a planet. And this is in Sumerian text. They talk about this Nibiru.
Forgot about that. Sorry.
They basically said this Nibiru had a civilization on it that was a super advanced civilization. The problem is because they'd gotten so industrialized, they kind of poisoned their own planet, and they started getting this basically global warming effect. They were heating something up, right? And this is all before all this stuff had been talked about. This is stuff that's kind of been, I'm using new terms, but they obviously had simplified terms.
So what was supposedly heating the planet up, though?
All their pollution, all this stuff or whatever.
From what?
From their industrialization.
Oh.
So like all these advanced technologies or whatever they had was causing problems.
Okay.
So, and granted, this is, thousands of years ago, this text was written, right?
Mhm.
And then they describe basically saying that those people, the Anunnaki is what they called themselves, or what we called them, came to our planet because they needed gold. You'd be like, why do they need gold? Well, it makes sense. They wanted to mine gold because we have an abundancy of gold in like certain areas.
Mhm.
And what they would do is they would turn it into almost like a vapor or a minor, a small molecule of it, and they would disperse it into their atmosphere. And it basically, the reflection from that would deflect the sun's rays, essentially making a Dyson sphere. So it would deflect the sun's rays because of all the reflectability or whatever of gold. It would deflect sun's rays, and so their planet wouldn't heat up as fast. All plausible. It's all science right now. They've talked about it.
No, it does make sense. Not to go off track here for just 1 second, but McLaren F1. They coated the engine bay with gold shielding to reflect heat.
Yep.
Away from the that kind of makes sense.
So them being an advanced civilization, apparently whatever planet that supposedly that this is on, which by the way is super weird because later on astronomers and astronomers like scientists, the actual not weird guys, but the astronomers believe that there is a Planet X, or now they're calling it like Planet 9, that is out there because they can measure the fact that it has such a mass that it affects the rest of the planets. So they know they haven't been able to find it, but they know there's something mass out there of a planet-sized thing that affects the gravitational pull of other planets. So they know it's out there, right? So with that being said, supposedly these Anunnaki, these inhabitants of this Planet X, according to the ancient Sumerian texts, they flew to the Earth because they took their readings or whatever. They decided that we had an abundancy of gold.
Right.
The only problem is they didn't anticipate how hard it was to mine the gold from the Earth. Meaning it was in the Earth, so they had to figure out a way to mine it. Well, they start trying to mine this gold, and they realize it's a pain in the butt. So, roughly about the time that they're there, they had these primates that are running around, and they said, okay, well, we're advanced enough. We know how to manipulate genetics. So we take a certain species that, probably maybe is the most strong or, the smartest of the bunch, whatever, that the easiest to manipulate their DNA to basically run a shovel,
Mm-hmm.
So they take these primates, they add a little bit of their own DNA that allows allows them to be able to look at a shovel and know what a shovel is, or to take orders, and they manipulate these monkeys. Right. And which is super weird because like Darwin's theory and like other these things of evolution actually supports that. And in our own record, they don't understand, talking about the missing link, is they don't understand how overnight we became smart enough to be able to operate tools and whatnot. Right. So they say,
do you really think it happened overnight?
Well, when they look at essentially the fossil record and like certain other things, it
does
happen.
Look that way.
Yeah. Like there's other weird theories. Like if you look at some of the Joe Rogan things, there's like some kind of guy out there that says that we were monkeys and our minds were open because we found some kind of psilocybin mushroom. We started eating a psilocybin mushroom and we had this awakening, and that's where we said, oh, hey.
Yeah, I think Rogan has some really interesting guests on his show, which
he does, and that's why
it'd be really awesome to be able to just sit down and talk with those people for like hours on end.
And that's the thing. Wow. I think that was kind of the point behind it. Like more or less like a 3-hour format, is because he really wanted to dive into this stuff, and I just like it because he's really well read for the most part of asking them the right questions per se. But anyways,
back on track.
So these Anunnaki show up. They genetically manipulate a primate that's here on the Earth, and it works out for a while. So they, some of their first iterations or whatever of these, basically they made this thing smart enough to be like, go dig, and it goes and digs, essentially a slave. Right.
Mhm.
And that's where you get also the gods idea of, some people will say the idea of a god, somebody being in the sky and coming down and knowing everything, is because it was actually these Anunnaki, and our ancestors from thousands of years ago perceived these Anunnaki as the gods. They actually have certain things in Hebrew, and certain things in the Bible, predecessors of the Bible, is basically talking about the fiery chariots that came down from, the sky and did all this, and super weird because it ties all in, right? But basically they show up. Well, it works out for a while. Eventually the Sumerians document that there was a revolt. In other words, we got too smart for our own good and basically said, mind your own shit. And we threw the shovels down, right? Right. Supposedly the first iteration is they manipulated it, which is super smart. And you're talking about a document or a stone tablet that came from, 10,000 years ago. Said that the first iteration of us is essentially made what would be like a male version of us, but it was not able to reproduce. And that worked out for a while. The mistake came is when they realized that they couldn't replace the workers fast enough, when workers would basically work themselves to death. And so they needed a way to start reproducing more workers while the other ones are still working. So then they made like a female counterpart that could carry the fetus and also have a companion per se.
Yeah.
And so they made like a female version. Well, they gave us basically the ability to reproduce. Well, the problem is we were like rabbits in those days, is we started reproducing so fast that we suddenly started outnumbering our alien overlords, if you will. Right.
What do rabbits do?
They reproduce pretty fast. We've never owned rabbits.
Oh,
yeah. That's why I always say, like, rabbits. I'm trying to be nice, not demonetize us here. But anyways, so essentially they started reproducing faster than they were trying to make new workers out of this. And that was their whole mindset behind it, is they wanted to have these workers, basically the next generation of workers ready to go, instead of basically having to clone the same thing. And whatever the cloning process or whatever they called it at those times took longer than it was to essentially just make a companion and have them, breed like animals, more or less, and produce another offspring.
So it's kind of like a petri dish operation, and then they figured out it's like petri dish does not work, and then we need to speed this up
faster.
Somehow.
And they also realized that they could genetically manipulate the species. So in other words, they could take the strongest workers, the ones that lasted the longest before their back broke, and those are the ones that they actually had reproduce or mate with the offspring, so that their offspring would be the hardest workers, or they would be the strongest, right?
Right.
Survival of the fittest, social Darwinism at its finest, right? So that's where it came from. The only problem is they didn't anticipate how fast we would reproduce, to the point to where we started outnumbering our slave owners, if you will, right? Mm-hmm. Well, there was at some point in the record or whatever, in the Sumerian record, there was some kind of revolt, and they were outnumbered. And they basically said, you know what, it's just not worth it. We've got enough of our whatever we need, that they just flew away and they left, which they say is like the origin story for God or Jesus leaving. And then someday he'll come back. There's always a few people, and apparently the primates or whatever that they had Braden in their own story was this great God came down and he gave us all this knowledge and he left, and someday he'll come back from the heavens.
Right. Yeah.
Right. That's in the Sumerian text. I mean, they talk about literally, they have these different, and it sounded like it was just a handful of them. It sounded like a handful of these aliens were allowed to come here to try this out. So basically it was like a pilot program. Once it failed, the higher up said, that's a waste of time. Let's just leave. And they left. And from that point on, we've basically evolved into the point to where we're at. And certain things like genetics and stuff actually support that idea. So,
Yeah, I can see
we
that.
are, seeded from an alien species, which actually, as scary as it sounds, solves a lot of our problems when you talk about our evolution. How did we become so smart so fast? How did all the others, 6, 8, 10 branches of primates, how are we still here and we still have apes beside us that did not evolve? Because, say, for example, an ape has the same lineage that we do, pretty close, right?
Right. Yeah.
And is as old as we are. And now they're saying certain parts of those primates are just now getting into what they think would be like the Stone Age. They're starting to figure out how to work tools. How did we get a jump start rapidly versus these primates that now, because it'd be different if it was a primate and they're no longer around and we are just the dominant primate and we come to this point. But we have strands of other primates, orangutans, all these other smart, probably the smartest of obviously the non-humans.
Yeah.
They've evolved alongside of us. So if you want to take that theory of us evolving, why us? That's the first question. Why us of all things? Did we somehow lose all of our hair and and learn how to do tools and learn speech and there's no answer for it.
Mhm.
Because if that's the case, if they're as old as we are, why haven't they developed speech? Why are they not another species that's alongside of us?
Yeah. Yeah. I see what you're saying there. And
Yeah.
that could be, or maybe they just haven't advanced as fast too. I did have this thought one time, kind of like what you're saying with like, you're laying awake and you can't sleep because you've got this running through your head.
Yeah.
And not sound like a crazy person, but I'm pretty sure everybody knows I'm crazy anyways. So
We went way off the
my
deep
thought
end.
was a long time ago, actually maybe even before the Egyptians, was that it was an advanced society. And I did relay this to maybe a few other people. And of course, they was like, you're off your rocker. And it wasn't anything about me being off my rocker. It's
No.
just simply like, you know what? So let's just think about this. So if you're an advanced society and you go to a planet and it's not panning out, it doesn't make any sense. The first thing you're going to do is, I'm not going to share my technology with you, and I'm going to completely eradicate and erase that. And then when I leave, okay, so, all right, we left a few pyramids, we left some monuments, we left something, but at the same time, there's no documentation on it to completely verify.
That theory goes along with what I was talking about earlier, that's supported too when you look at the native peoples and all of their, like the Mayans, for example, saying that we live in the fifth world.
Mhm.
Some of them say that we actually evolved a long time ago, like millions of years ago, and that they've ran into some kind, some basically extinction level event that you couldn't change.
Right. Yeah.
A few of them survived, and of those few that survived, they basically taught a handful of people the technology that they had previously.
Mhm.
And here's where it makes sense to me when we're talking about that. Where we're at right now, we have all this technology. We do. But even you that knows everything about computers, if shit was like wiped off of the face of the earth, would you be able to build that computer from
Goodness.
components in the ground?
No, I could not.
Would you be able to process
I couldn't even begin to start to do that.
to make the shell of the outside to make all the supporting things that goes along with it?
Yeah, there's no way I could do that.
Now you're going to have the basic idea of like how it works, and you're going to share that with people.
Yeah, I'm going to know how it should work, and I'm going to have an idea or a theory of what I think should happen. But at the same time, what you just said is the minerals needed for it, the process to make it happen. I have no clue.
Some of that's basically like, again, I keep using the Mayans, but the Mayans talk about this. We're living in the fifth world. And again, that's another one of those things that in the Mayan culture, roughly 11,000 years ago or whatever, when we had that genetic bottleneck that I talked about. It took us down to 1,000 people, predecessors to the Sumerians, which is predecessors to the Egyptians. We all come from. Maybe that 1,000 was a survivor from an extinction level event. In this case was, I can't remember what they called it. It was a super volcano that turned into, it basically turned it into a nuclear winter.
Mm-hmm.
And only 1,000 people survived. There's also in every major native culture, they talk about something what they call the Hopis and stuff called ant people. Ant people were the people that went underground, and that they emerged after the catastrophe. What do we do right now with our congressmen in the event of a nuclear holocaust?
Well, I think we all go underground. So
Put them in bunkers, right? We sustain. Yeah. That's why they have the Doomsday Seed Vault or whatever it is. They put all the seeds in there. In the event that something happens,
kind of cool though,
right? In the event that something happens, that we can repopulate.
Yeah.
Right. And they try to, they put all these bunkers strategically out throughout whatever, us, the Russians, everybody else does it. They talked about those people reemerging from something, and they came out and they basically had their own culture, because they had developed it underground. So you're talking say, again, spitballing here. Say that we did have a nuclear war, and that whoever the smartest people were stuck in an underground thing, right? Mm-hmm. But it didn't just happen for those people. Now they survive for the next generation. They've been underground for 50 years to be able to survive not only the nuclear winter, but the radiation and all these other things, right? Or to basically allow the earth to start regrowing itself to survive or to be able to plant crops, right? Mm-hmm. So now all those original people have died off, and the people that are emerging are the only ones. They're now offspring of those people. So their only life that they've ever known has been underground.
Yeah.
All they've heard is stories about green trees, or maybe if they're lucky, some people painted on a wall down there of what a green tree. And so that's their idea of a green tree, is what your weird painting is on the wall in an underground bunker, right? So supposedly all these major native religions talk about these essentially people that emerged from the ground, and that's what started their cultures. Hopi were a big one, talking about, again, I keep referring to the ant people. Is the Hopi said that they came from the ant people. So they basically, a lot of these, they even talk about a lot of their monuments, they didn't make them. The ant people made them. And that basically when they reemerged and they were offspring of the ant people, they talk about, some of the first people talked about, we made that.
Right.
We made the pyramids. They can't explain things like, how they move stone. I mean, they try to, but how they moved 50 tons of stone or whatever to make a pyramid.
Right.
When the common belief is basically they were just above hunter gatherers. So they're out there, building fires with the big, clubs, clubbing somebody. And somehow they have to survive from day to day. But yet they're going to put aside their basically hunting and gathering to
that's not going to happen.
Huge stones from a quarry.
Nope.
Move them 5 miles away or whatever down the Nile River and construct a pyramid that basically, according to them, serves no real purpose other than, a tomb.
Right. Well, I mean, obviously the easy out for that is it was slave labor, and they were forced to do it over hundreds of years or whatever it was. But
even that doesn't make sense. A prime example is you can maybe even say that about the pyramids, but the Sphinx itself, basically there's times that there's Egyptian rule. There was an Egyptian ruler that essentially said that he describes it in hieroglyphs that this thing was buried under the sand, and that he slept under it one night, and that's when that's what told him that he was going to be the ruler, Khufu or one of them, and that it was half unburied from the sand. He basically slept in it. So in other words, it was thousands of years older than the Egyptians, right?
Right.
And then if believe it or not, there's pictures of like in the late 1800s where if you don't know, the Sphinx was buried again. It didn't get unburied again until like the early 1900s. And when they unburied it, they realized that the head was not the same size as the rest of the body, that had obviously been chipped away. And there was that Khufu that supposedly slept under it or whatever, basically had that. That's why they thought he built it. It's because he had it recarved in the shape of his face.
Oh.
And that it didn't match the rest of the body. But even he admits that he did not build that. So they said, they built it in his honor. But proportionally, it does not fit the rest of the body. And he says that I slept under it. In other words, it was already constructed like 20 years before he became ruler. Right. And by the way, there's no any hieroglyphics out there explaining how they built any of the pyramids. It's always referred to that basically somebody else built them.
Yeah,
regardless of the Egyptologist or whatever. That's the thing, is they don't want to talk about it.
Yeah,
the common misconception among Egyptologists is they are taught in school when you become an Egyptologist is that they were built during somebody's reign, or that it was a whatever.
Right.
Basically, they were all supposed to be tombs for Egyptian rulers. Nobody has ever been found in the pyramids. They found like a sarcophagus, like a big granite sarcophagus in there, but it's like huge. And even then, they've never found a body inside those. Miles away, they have the Valley of the Kings, which is where they found all the burials, the mummies and all this stuff that you talk about, the Tutankhamun being the most common one.
Right.
But that was the Valley of the Kings. That they had burials basically in the sides of mountains miles away. And nothing to do with that. So, and that's all factual, but they want to give that narrative that the pyramids were it was a burial chamber for like whatever, even though they never found a body inside of them.
Right. Yeah.
And they have no concept why they would build something so huge. And if you don't realize that the shaft, that like the shafts and stuff, that like basically they're like air shafts that go down into this thing.
Mm-hmm.
The tomb itself is tiny in perspective to the rest of the pyramid. So you're telling me you basically stacked up millions and millions of, tons or whatever of rock, these huge blocks for a tiny little area in the center of it that's supposed to be a tomb.
Yeah, that makes zero sense.
But there's no body in there. There's only like basically a granite sarcophagus, which again, some of that stuff even defies reasoning. Like, why would they make it out of that certain stone that was like miles away?
Mm-hmm.
And how did they get the stone from there down to where that's at? And then even then, how did they, there's all this weird, there was a weird common misconception for a while that they rolled it on trees. Like they rolled these blocks on trees.
Trees from what?
But there were no trees. Right? Or whatever. There was supposed to be some kind of whatever palm tree or something, whatever. But they know that's been a desert essentially for like something like, 9,000 years prior, at least. It was never, the last time that they had, which is another weird thing about the Sphinx, by the way. Dr. Robert Schoch, which is like a Ivy League geologist guy. He shows up. He's super well respected. Everybody loves him. He shows up at the request of another guy to look at the Sphinx. And he's a well-known geologist. He says, those are watermarks, like water erosion, not sand erosion on the side of the enclosure of the Sphinx. Well, the last time that was essentially like a rainforest in order to get water erosion was like 25,000 years prior. And they were suddenly, you're a kook. You don't know what you're talking about. Prior to that, he was really well known, and he says, no, you can look, this is water erosion. Well, it puts it way older than any known civilization. Right? There's like, what is it? Like, I can go on for days, but there's like Göbekli Tepe, which is like in Turkey, that they said there's no civilization older than whatever, 5,000 BC or something like that. Göbekli Tepe, they found in like Turkey, they unburied it and they carbonated it to like 10,500 years, 10,500 BC. And it's like a huge thing. I've only excavated like a small portion of it. So that ruins like all the common misconception of, the Sumerians or whatever being the first civilized culture.
Right.
And they don't even know who built Göbekli Tepe. I don't even know who built it. But they have huge animal reliefs. So they didn't carve it into, they were smart enough that when they built the stones, they carved the reliefs so the animal's sticking out of the thing, which takes a lot of skill versus carving. I can go and carve something into a tree, like a snake or whatever. It's a whole lot more for me to remove the majority of the tree and just leave a huge animal sticking off the side of it. So anyways, I'm getting way off the deep end here. I have to take a break. To go.
No, you're doing awesome.
Yeah.
I
got to go.